Hello, my name is Aki Jääskeläinen. I work as a professor in the Unit of Industry Engineering and Management at Tampere University, Finland. In this small video, I will tell you something about value creation in public procurement. The objectives and contents of this video relates first to the understanding of value in public procurement. So value is a very multidimensional phenomenon, and in order to understand the mission and strategic objectives of public procurement, we need an extensive understanding of different forms of value. The second part of this video relates to a practice approach in value creation in public procurement. So it gives some understanding and ideas of how to create value. So what is this value then about in public procurement? First of all, we need to understand that there are two main elements of value: benefits and costs. And both of these can contain various components. Starting from benefits, we can see that in public procurement, very often it's important to specify the quality that is purchased and what is the quality in this particular case that we are trying to get. And very often, of course, it somehow can relate to specifications, especially if we are buying something which is technical. But at the same time, quality can also relate to certain more subjective quality elements like satisfaction of the users of public services. Service availability is very important in many public services. The services need to cover sufficient regions so that, for example, the access of services is sufficient for the public. And this can also be one of the specifications in public procurement. Delivery performance is important, especially when we are buying something which is a physical product or something like that, so that if we deliver something, it needs to be also, of course, on time, but not only on time, but also accurate. So it will contain, the shipment will contain everything which is agreed on, and also flexibility. So if we have some certain change in our need, for example, that we need more in quantity or even quality. So what is the possibility to change the supply and to be more flexible? Then supplier market performance is maybe something which is not so common, and here we refer to basically building supply market so that they are having like enough competition among suppliers, and there is some stability in the supply markets. We will get enough offers for the calls of tender, and also that we somehow support the growth of suppliers. And then innovations, which are very essential in this teaching offering. And so innovations can also be included as one of the potential targets or benefits of public procurement. And the innovations may contain both product and process related innovation. And then sustainability, which is can include all the three forms of sustainability, and can be taken as one of the potential targets of public procurement, and also the benefits that should be considered. And as we can see from here, there are actually quite many different types of benefits that we can get. And not all procurement cases need to consider these all, but this just illustrates the wide, extensive scope of different types of benefits. Then when going to the cost side, we can see that first of all, there's of course this direct product and service cost, what we buy from what we want to get. This is the most common type of cost. But we also need to take into consideration the transactional cost. How much does it take time, for example, to do the administrative duties? How resource intensive the ordering activities are, and what about the delivery and inventory carrying costs? So basically, there are many different types of transactional costs, which are also important to consider. Then the operations cost relate especially to the case when we are, for example, we can buy a technical device and then start using that, and it, for example, may use some amount of energy. So if we buy a little bit more in the direct product service cost, we can maybe get less expensive operations costs for the product or service that we are buying. So this is also one element which somehow also relates to the life cycle costs. Okay, and then when moving towards developing public procurement, so we can also think about the maturity of public procurement in value creation. So those different elements of cost that I just showed you may possibly require different level of procurement maturity. This illustration does not mean that basically that the costs are not any more important when we develop the maturity, because the costs are important in any case. But this proposes that when we are trying to get more extensive and more multidimensional value out of public procurement, we get more requirements for public procurement, and the maturity needs to be higher in order to be able to obtain these certain value benefits. Starting from the left-hand side, we can see that if we target for quality and costs, for example, it might be enough that we have this type of internally efficient procurement, where the procurement process is efficient, we are obeying procurement law, and we possibly aim for quite short-term cost-saving actions. And in many cases, actually, it's perfectly enough to be at this level of procurement maturity. But when we are trying to get innovations or sustainability, this might not be enough. We need to think about something else too. And we can talk about internally effective procurement, where we connect the operational objectives of a public organization to the procurement objectives. So we need the cross-functional integration between procurement function and also the public service functions, where the services are basically taken care of. So we need to have discussion with those who are experts in the public services and those who are experts in public procurement. And also possibly we need vertical integration in order to implement the organizational targets via these procurement activities. Then moving towards even more demanding procurement, where we aim for supply market performance or getting maybe more longer term value, we start to require more relationship oriented procurement, where possibilities innovation objectives are more integrated in the call for tenders, and we have supplier performance in place, which also takes into consideration innovation objectives. We start to have more frequent communication with suppliers, and also the supplier development is taken care of somehow. And then finally, we can also talk about supply market oriented procurement, where we very much also want to understand what's going on in supply markets. And we can start discussing also about customer attractiveness. So how attractive the public customer is in the eyes of the suppliers. The most innovative suppliers may be actually quite selective to which customers they want to give their best resources. That's why it's very important that also the public customers pay attention to the customer attractiveness. Moving forward towards the practice view on creating value in public procurement. We can identify different types of practices. The supplier-oriented practices typically contain relational and non-relational practices. Non-relational practices contain elements like definition of contractual criteria, supplier selection based on those criteria, and monitoring of the criteria. They are not requiring the inputs from the supplier. They are mostly initiated by the buyer organization. Then we have relational practices which needs the efforts from both supplier and the buyer organization. And these can connect, for example, to interaction with suppliers and negotiation with suppliers. We can also identify internal practices which are happening within the buyer organization, like cross-functional practices, as I discussed before. So these kind of practices that connect different functions within the buyer organization. We can have vertically aligned practices like practices implementing strategic objectives. We can have enabling practices which concentrate on making the procurement function to work better, like, for example, implementing some new technology support for procurement. And then within PSM practices, which definitely relate to many different types of operational activities within the procurement function, like managing supplier information. In this illustration, I show you an example of value creation in public procurement via these different types of practices. In this figure, we can see that there are different perspectives to value creation. There are public buyer perspective. There is user perspective, which means the public customer, basically the citizen who is using the public organization services. And then we have the supplier perspective. And all of these can be considered when thinking about value creation and practices. With this gray, we can show those values which actually can be relevant for different actors. So, for example, sustainability seems to be something which is important not only for public buyer organization or the user of public services, but also for the supplier. And another element in this illustration are these circles. There are black circles and empty circles, and this illustrates the identified connections between different types of practices and the particular value. So this study actually was done based on a very extensive literature study and we wanted to understand how public value can be created by these different practices. And if we concentrate now to the external practices, those practices which relate to the supplier side. So we can see that if we want to get, for example, innovations, it's essential and crucial to have those relational practices in place. And then for sustainability, the situation is maybe more balanced in that way that it's of course it's beneficial that we have the relational practices in place, but also the non-relational practices may be quite important. So that means, for example, that we can set targets or criteria to the calls for tender to capture those sustainability objectives and just pay attention to it via this type of means. So it's not only so that we somehow like use some more relational activities to get the sustainability. It can be handled via non-relational means too. So a few key takeaways from this micro lecture are presented here, and we can see that as I started with the public procurement value, so we found out that it's very multidimensional phenomenon, and also this value can be examined from the point of view of different actors. In innovative and sustainable procurement, the demand for procurement maturity rises. And then the value creation via public procurement can be examined from the point of view of practices. And these practices are also such that actually they could also be transferred between public buy organizations. And this is something that I think should be considered because public organizations are not competing with each other. So it actually could be a very useful way of improving public procurement, that we first identify those working and functional value creating practices and then also transfer those practices between the public organizations. Here you can find one article which gives you some further information of this topic, and I now end my lecture, and thank you.